Debt, the most misunderstood, abused, misused ingredient of all of the ingredients in your wealth pantry. And that is what this video is all about, really getting to grips with understanding debt, because not all debt is created equal. And it's understanding debt and how to use it in our lives can really be the difference between wealth heaven or creating absolute money hell in your life. So I'm Ann Wilson, the Wealth Chef. And in this video, we're deep diving into debt, that key ingredient that does play a part in our wealth journey. But it's one of those ingredients that we really need to understand its subtlety, because if we don't understand it, it's so easy to end up putting it into our wealth feast and completely destroying what we're trying to create in our life. So let's understand the different kinds of debts and how we use it. Now, the most easiest way to first consider debt is that there are three kinds. So the one kind of debt you want to be looking for and having more of in your life is the debt that actually expands your wealth, expands your living, gives you access to more, but not in a way of just having more stuff, but actually expands your wealth and gives you more value and enjoyment. And we're going to come back to exactly what that kind of debt is. And yes, there is that kind of debt. Now there's another debt that is completely neutral. It doesn't add to your wealth, but it also doesn't deplete you. And we'll get to what that one is. And then the third kind is the kind that actually most people have in their life, but it's the kind that is the worst for them. This is the sugar binging. This is the side that depletes you, and this is the consumer debt. But I want you to think about it in terms of this is debt that causes your world and your wealth and your money to contract. And so those are your three types: expanding debt, neutral debt, contracting debt. And when we're able to classify in that way and ask ourselves if we're going to enter into this debt area of your wealth quadrant and consider going into debt, the first thing you've got to ask yourself is, entering into this debt relationship going to expand my life, expand my wealth? Is it going to be able to add value? Is it going to be completely neutral, so it's going to balance out both the asset and liability side, or is it depleting? Is it a contracting debt? And that is such a great question for you to know whether you proceed with that conversation, enter into that relationship with that debt. So let's get to contracting debt, because this is actually the debt where most people have in their life, just not understanding that there are different kinds. So this is things like credit card debt. This is overdrafts. These are loans on anything that cannot expand in value. Anything that once you've consumed it once, it's gone. Hence why it's consumer debt. You know, the word consume also means to destroy, deplete, to get rid of. So that gives a good indication as why it's not so great and why it's not going to expand in your life. And most people end up being in this relationship with debt, in that kind of debt, that it's depleting and contracting in their life, because not only have you lost the money to buy that thing, but you lose more money by the interest you've got to pay to repay that debt. So this increases your expenses and makes more money flow out of your life. But you also lose because that money that has been spent first going into that debt and now paying off that debt, the opportunity cost, if that debt instead had gone into your asset side and what actually could create for you, you lose all of the potential of that money. So it's worse than just spending it. So when money goes out at expenditure, yes, that money's out of your life. But when it's converted into consumer debt because of this additional accelerator effect of interest, you lose more. And as we've discussed in other videos, in this credit card debt, you can end up paying 8, 12, 15 times more for that very thing that you've consumed, just in terms of how you've brought that into your life. So that is that consumer debt, anything that contracts. So this is something that can't increase in value. So is a car loan consumer debt? Absolutely, because a car is what's called a depreciating, well, a lot of people call it an asset. It's not an asset, so get that out of your head. It's a depreciating thing, meaning its value goes down. So when you enter into a debt relationship, say with your car loan or that lease agreement or that financing agreement, you're paying interest on that car, but it's also going down in value. So it's consuming your wealth and costing you more. Any kind of clothing, holiday, anything that you use once and it's gone is consumer debt. So that is a debt that absolutely contracts your wealth. And you know that that is the type of debt you want to be blitzing. So go and find the video and get the resources from the Wealth Chef Resource Center on blitzing your debt, because that is the consumer debt you want out of your life. That is not going to add to your wealth. So the second category of debt is neutral debt. So what is this? A lot of people say to me, Anne, how should I be dealing with my mortgage, my bond, my home loan? And should I be blitzing it in the same way that I deal with my overdrafts, my student loan, my credit card, my car loan? And I go, not at all. Because a mortgage, a home loan, a bond, whatever you would call it in your country, is this where you borrow money to purchase a home, your primary home, is what I call neutral debt. Why is this? Because you've borrowed against something that at least we can expect it, not always, but to at minimum to maintain its value and possibly increase in value. And so preferably it will increase in value at a similar rate to the borrowing, not necessarily though. And so while we absolutely want to be clearing that debt and paying down that bond or that mortgage as quickly as possible, it's a lower priority debt than your consumer debt because it's got something against it. It's got something in the form of an asset. Now remember, your home is not an asset. We've covered that elsewhere, but it's neutral. So they balance each other out, because technically, if you needed to, you should be able to sell that thing, specifically a home, and recover that money that you spent and at least clear your mortgage. Now, in some cases where we go into what's called negative equity because of buying too high or at the top of a property market or borrowing too much on that property, you can end up in what's called a negative equity situation. But 90% of the time, that's neutral, and is why it would be a lower priority debt for you to pay off. And you still want it paid off because it's still costing you. That money that you've borrowed is still costing you an interest. And also emotionally, there's something incredibly supportive and secure about knowing that you've got a roof over your head, you've got four walls around you that you can stay in no matter what. And this is why a lot of people will choose to have a home even though it's not an asset. And we covered in a lot more detail why your home's not an asset and why it's so important not to get caught into believing it's an asset and constantly upgrading your home, thinking that that is your pension. An incredibly frightening strategy that so many people get caught into, believing their home is an asset. No, it's not, but it is neutral debt. So now the third kind of debt, yep, 3 fingers, is the expanding debt. Yes, there is that kind. And sometimes this is also called good debt versus bad debt, which is that consumer debt. And I prefer the word expanding because it lets you know when you ask that question, by entering into this debt relationship, by borrowing this money, the thing that I'm borrowing it on, will it expand my wealthy life? Will it increase one of the assets that are in my asset drawer? So what are we talking about? This is where you borrow money to be able to create or have an asset. So one example of expanding debt is investment property. This is where you go and get a mortgage, a home loan, a bond on residential, commercial, retail, industrial property, where it's a true asset, that asset class. So you can now control that asset, get all the benefit as a result of borrowing money. And you use this thing called leverage. Now we go into a lot more detail in another video on the power of using leverage in property and why property is such a juicy asset class. But now you've got something that can expand your wealth pot, both in terms of the income that it can bring into your life from the rental, other people paying for access to that property and using it, but also the capital growth. This is the value of that property growing. So it makes your net worth increase, the value of those assets increase. So that is good debt, that's expansion debt. You can also borrow and go into debt for equity investing. A little bit more volatile, but in the same way. So any kind of borrowing that you've borrowed money to get an asset, as long as that asset is growing or earning income at a rate higher than what the cost of your borrowing is, that is expansion debt. And this is how you get your assets working hard for you and you leverage and grow your assets in that way. Now, another kind of expansion debt is when you invest in you. Remember, you are the fourth asset class. You are, in fact, your most important asset. And you need to constantly be growing and expanding you, your knowledge, your well-being, your health, because it's when you can come into the managing your wealthy life with greater insight, more knowledge. That is how everything else accelerates. So that can be from knowledge. So student debt or student loans is a form of expansion debt. But like any debt, we need to have done our numbers. It's not just saying, oh, well, I'm investing in myself, therefore it's okay. You've got to really know that what you are putting that money to is going to give you a return greater than the cost of that debt. I see so many people going into the personal development world or going into starting their own business, entrepreneurs, who keep pouring money into another training course, another program, another mentor, another coach, another book, but that whole enoughness story, but also convincing themselves that, oh, it's okay because I'm investing in myself. It's positive debt, it's expansion debt. Well, remember that whole thing about you've got to ensure you get value for it, because sometimes this little bit can be one of the money tricks we play on ourselves, coming from our own not enoughness. And where in a way it could be expansion debt, but if we're coming into it believing that we're not yet good enough, that we can't start yet, and we need that next video camera before you can go out and start filming and making money from what you've got, or you need that next training, or you've got to study that next thing, or go and get that MBA before you can go and get that job you really want, that is when it actually becomes contracting debt, because you're coming at it from a not enoughness rather than coming from how can I expand more, and that great base. So there you go. Those are your three kinds of debt: expanding, neutral, and contracting. And what you want is to have some neutral in your life, to have some of those other wealthy aspects like home that can give you support, but you want to minimize that. You want to be blitzing that contracting debt and using expanding debt, but really with wealth chef savvy and knowing that you're doing it, really understanding that your assets are actually assets and expanding in your life. So I'd love to know in the comments below this video, which is the kind of debt that you believe you have the most in your life. And having this distinction now, you now know what you need to focus on blitzing. And if you're watching this anywhere other than over at thewealthchef.com, pop on over there, because that's where all the conversation's happening. And subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of these great episodes. And enjoy diving into your debt drawer and sorting out and seeing what you've got. Get rid of the stuff that's not serving you, expand the stuff that is, and live that rich, juicy life.